April 17th, 2017. Tonight was a particularly timely webinar for me as we switch from the winter protocols to the summer protocols. And I think I want to talk about our safety and what we do to try to ensure that kids are feeling safe, that young adults and adolescents are feeling safe, but also extrapolate how that fits in clinically for us. And I had a more recent episode that I think highlighted an important principle that I'm going to talk about tonight. And I'm also going to talk about emotional safety. I've talked about that in other webinars, but I want to touch on both of those. In fact, I got a recent letter from an angry student of mine from 17 years ago from some things that he says that I did or didn't do for him, and I want to share that with you tonight, and just be aware of how we can at sometimes make people feel uncomfortable, make people feel judged and not safe. So with that prelude, let me get right into tonight's webinar. First of all, physical safety. We're going to make sure that that the children qualify in terms of their health, that they're going to get a physical. When people ask me who's appropriate for wilderness, really the biggest risks for us are on the front end are people's health history, what they're capable of, having weight issues, having a BMI that's too high or unhealthy for them to start off. Even though we start off moderately, but to start off with this regime can be very challenging. So they have to have a basic fitness level, and obesity is going to be a challenge. On the other end, being severely anorexic is also going to be, but also other injuries that they might have can also show up, flare up, be exposed during this process. Back issues, neck issues, carrying a heavy backpack, for example, can show up or be exposed or be exacerbated during this process. Allergies can be very risky, right? So allergies, if you have a history of anaphylactic shock, that can be a rule out for us, because again, even though we can deal with that, we have the EpiPens out there and we have the Benadryl, and we can, in the most severe examples, call life flight. You don't want to have that kind of experience out in the wilderness. Now, we've never had anything tragic happen in our program, and in part that's because of a conservative stance with a lot of these things. There are other wilderness programs that will take greater risks around this. You should also know that as your child enters the program, that there's an observation period. That's part of the Earth phase. Part of the Earth phase is to pay special attention to him or her, and also moving at the pace of the slowest member of the group. So you want to make sure that you're paying special attention. You have more eyes on the new students, new clients as they come into the program. In terms of our wilderness staff, and they've been put to the test a few times. They're all CPR trained. There's a wilderness first responder in every group, often more. And of course, they have access to healthcare providers via cell phones, satellite phones, or two-way radios. My stance is that we're going to treat all medical complaints as if they are the absolute truth, and we're going to take them at face value. While there is a history for a lot of students trying to make excuses, not wanting to hike, not wanting to carry a backpack, you have to rule that out. And when I get to that more recent example that I'm going to share with you, it's a great example of that. There are daily health checks on their basic fitness, their capillary refill, their feet and hands are checked. We observe if they have cracks, dried skin, if they're not hydrating. We monitor the hydration all day long. We monitor the sunscreen. We monitor their dental hygiene. So for the most part, even with our young adults, there's more supervision around their health care than there would be at home or in any other setting. Because in the wilderness, again, you're more vulnerable. It's a more risky environment, so you have to pay special attention. The research does show in the outdoor behavioral health programs that we belong to, the group that we belong to, that you have a greater chance by several times of needing to attend emergency services at home, from playing sports, from recreating at home, than you do in the wilderness. Besides the daily check-ins with their basic health, there are also bi-weekly check-ins that happen for them, where the medical coordinator or the nurse comes out and takes their vital statistics, listens to their complaints, makes sure, monitors, maybe even monitoring whatever medication they might be on. If they're sick and on antibiotic, all of that is monitored and followed up on. Again, you're not going to fight the safety battles. And the most important thing, and this is critical, is there are, of course, natural and logical consequences. But for our students who struggle with self-esteem, with self-care, that we're not going to let them knowingly in any way put themselves at risk because they're practicing poor self-care. Right? In the wintertime, it's a special challenge with exposure to cold and frostbite, frost nip. We have a lot of students that, if not monitored, would end up getting themselves in trouble. And most recently, I had a student who was obviously in some discomfort with his back, but was minimizing that to his therapist weekly and to some of the staff. Although visually, it was apparent. And it wasn't until his parent visit where they could sense something dramatically different for him that it was brought up. And finally, we brought him into the doctor. He was seen and he had a more significant back issue. And so clinically, a lot of our students aren't apt to be able to advocate for themselves and take care of themselves. So our commitment, our ethic, our training is that we're going to pay attention to those things, even if they're not going to pay attention to them for themselves. Because people that are struggling with self-esteem, with shame, with mood issues, with self-valuing, self-worth type of issues are going to become not the squeaky wheel in the process, right? They're going to feel like they're burdening other people, or they're just complaining, or they're being helpless, or they just don't value themselves. And so it becomes our job to make sure that we are the safety net, even if they are not providing, even if they're not vocalizing, even if they're not advocating for themselves. So whether it's hot or cold weather, we're paying attention to them and their symptoms, what they might be exhibiting, even if they're not complaining about it. With regard to runners, if you ever have a child that is a runner, and this only applies to the adolescents and young adults, they're called walkers because they're not running away from us because they're allowed to leave. But if you have a runner, we send out search and rescue, we contact the local authorities, we go out and we do a broad search, and we make sure that all of those safety protocols are followed. And in all cases, over the 22 years I've been doing this, we've always found our runners, always found them at the end of the day, and they've always been safe. People ask about wildlife, and to tell you the truth, there's virtually no wildlife risk. There's a possibility of a snake bite or a scorpion bite, but we've never had either one of those things. We've never had a spider bite that was significant. And all the more serious wildlife, they stay away from us. We are loud, we smell bad, we make lots of noise, even when we're being relatively quiet. So wildlife stay away. And we also practice safety protocols around how we store our food and where our food is at night. Just in case some critter, some animal wants to come by, they're going to go to the area where there's the food, not the area where people are sleeping. In emergency situations, and probably the most severe emergency situation we've ever had, happened with one of our therapists. And first, he was stabilized with by those in the group that were trained, the staff in the group that were trained, and then Life Flight was called. We also had an accident, just a staff accident, car accident years ago where the same kind of thing happened. And the emergency professionals praised the staff, saying, if they weren't protected, this person would be paralyzed. And now this person works for us and is our health and wellness coordinator. So emergencies are handled. Somebody asked me the other day, somebody was observing some of our emergency contingency operations and said, how does everybody seem so calm all the time? And I said, they're so well trained, they're so practiced and so rehearsed that crises don't seem like crises. It's actually moving very slowly for the staff because they're thinking about this all the time. With regard to violence, there's virtually no tolerance for violence toward anybody at any time. That is one of the things that can get you removed from the program. Now a lot of students might posture. There have been incidences of students, clients in the past being aggressive with each other, and they're removed from the program. But so we're not going to give that to them on the front end as an easy way out, but we're going to make sure that children are protected from each other. We're not going to allow bullying of another student, of another client, or physical intimidation. If a child is suicidal, has ideation or thoughts about it, they're going to be on a certain kind of watch. One-to-one watch within arm's reach, and there's going to be protocols around the things that they can keep on, and they'll be searched at night so they can't find a little piece of metal or sharp object. They're going to be within staff reach. Even when they use the restroom, 2 staff will go and stand beside them, facing away from them and making sure that they're safe. So suicide level watches can happen out in the field. And you'd be surprised, but a reasonably large percentage of our students, somewhere between 15 and 20% of our students, come in on a watch where they're either at risk to run or at risk to hurt themselves. And because of the numbers, because of the staff to student ratios, we can support that. And a lot of times I'll give parents the front end talk of, if we believe your child is unsafe, if we believe that this level of care, this type of intervention is going to put them at risk, then they're going to be removed from the program. But the possibility, the high ceiling of our program is also fantastic. And so in no case where I've given that speech on the front end have we needed to remove a student, because we're capable of watching them at that level. And so there really are a lot of examples over the years. There's a lot of experiences. Our staff are trained in real time out there to deal with wilderness and wilderness injuries. I had several protocols, standard operating procedures that I could have showed you tonight, but to read them, they're boring. But we have protocols for hiking temperatures. We have protocols for various safety concerns. Temperatures high and low, hot and cold. So there's protocols that the staff are trained on and required and report on every day to our backup personnel and staff. And then our question by the field directors at staff change. What can you do if you don't feel safe? Ask your therapist for more information. You can always ask them for more information about what are they doing? How is my child looking? Will they take care of themselves? You deserve to be the squeaky wheel. You deserve to ask tough questions. You deserve to be a critical consumer of this intervention. We believe in it. We're passionate about it. And it's our job to instill confidence in you. So ask your therapist for more information. Ask for permission to talk to the medical director or the nurse. Talk to somebody who has more training. And again, be demanding. Work your way up the ladder if you feel like it even needs to go to the partner level if you're not getting your questions answered. But I always say to people, it's not a simple process of just trusting the process. And this is a deeper therapeutic idea. I think you need to do what you need to do to trust the process. If you can't do it, if you can't get the answers that you want, then you don't have to trust it. And then if you don't have to trust it, it's not appropriate for your child to be with us. That's the fact. So do what you need to do to trust it. Ask the questions. Talk to who you need to. And then at some point, if you keep trying everything and over a period of time, you just can't get to that level of trust, then it's not an appropriate placement for you and your family. You can ask for our safety protocols. At any point, you can ask for the written standard operating procedures. We'd be happy to provide those. Talk to other parents on the reference list. Ask them questions about physical and emotional safety. In some extreme cases, I've just, when parents are so anxious and there's nothing really going on, I said, come out to the program. Spend some time in another group. Not your child's group necessarily if they're not clinically ready, but spend some time in another group. And on every occasion when I've done that and somebody's taken me up on that offer, they've walked away completely comfortable with what's going on out there. And you know, this is an ethic that I adopted years ago. The goal is for us to be as transparent as possible about what's going on out there. Now, we do have clinical reasons for doing things like no phone calls in the beginning and visits later on and so forth. Those are there, but that's not about transparency. That's about clinical goodness of fit. But I think some of the times that people have been most impressed with what we do around physical safety is when they've seen a crisis. When they've seen a difficult situation, they've seen how people are able to rally around it. Shifting a little bit to the emotional safety of the program, some features of the program. These are closed groups that students are coming in and going out, but it's not a group that's reforming every day. It's a group that stays together. And there's camaraderie, there's safety, there's experience, there's history. When you combine that with 8-day staff shifts, and I cannot emphasize enough the value of an 8-day shift. I mean, think of that. There aren't other mental health approaches where people stay on shift 8 days, 24 hours. They get breaks during that time, but that's their shift, is for 8 days. And when you have that kind of continuity, things don't fall through the crack. Things aren't missed. Balls aren't handed off. It's not easy for a student to kind of marginalize or dismiss a difficult relationship. That needs to be dealt with. And then you take that wealth of information that's gained from those 8 days, and you spend one day where the staff shifts overlap. That's in our program, that's Tuesday. And the outgoing staff spending the time with the ingoing staff, talking with each staff member, with the staff member that's going to be taking over, talking about each student in detail, what they did that week, what their assignments were like, highs for the week, lows for the week, themes for the week, how they're doing on the therapy progress and assignments, getting feedback from peers, getting feedback from the client or student themselves. So staff shift and groups that maintain the integrity throughout the program, although there are students leaving as they graduate, but maintaining the integrity other than that is a valuable contribution. They're relatively small groups, 6 to 10 clients or students with 3 to 4 staff. That's a really great ratio. In the adolescents, it's single gender. In the young adults, it can be co-ed, but sometimes in the young adults, it's still single gender. It gives everybody an opportunity, for the most part, if we're talking about heterosexuals, they're not distracted by the flirtation, right? By trying to impress. They're working on identity before intimacy. And in our models, the models that we look at in human development, identity is the foundation for intimacy. And many people in our culture move to intimacy before their identity is adequately developed, right? They depend upon the other person for a sense of self. We can all relate to that to some degree. So single gender is valid in terms of the research and the theory. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to homosexual clients, to gay and lesbian clients, but you often don't have many in one group. So that's one way to mitigate it. This idea that people are going to be worried about coupling up instead of working on their identity. There's a culture of openness. There's a culture of feedback. The staff, we ask the staff to model vulnerability and accountability. When I had this former student of 17 years reach out to me, first emailed me and then reached out to me on social media, my thought was, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to communicate those things, and I was younger 17 years ago, and I made some mistakes, and I'm sorry if you were hurt by it. Trying to model for the staff the same thing, and I think sometimes we think we have to get it right and defend ourselves, and it's okay to say you're sorry. It's okay to model that vulnerability. And most importantly, and I talk about this so often in the webinars, is practicing a non-judgmental approach, holding each client with love and compassion and curiosity in your mind. Changing it from the judgment, the moralistic kind of judgment, to practical, pragmatics. I don't think this is working for you, or you seem stuck, versus you're doing it wrong or bad or crazy. And we communicate those things much more subtly than we can imagine. So this is a constant practice of ours to teach and to mentor our staff to develop this culture. And we try to practice it with each other. Right? We believe at Evoke in something we call organizational health, to model these kinds of challenging communication and relationship skills together. The positive peer culture is a powerful thing, where the more senior members of the groups are modeling for the more junior members of the group, the newer members of the groups. And two things happen with that. Number one, a new client or student is much more often open to hear what their peer has to say. Number two, you get invested more in the thing that you teach. So one of the greatest tools for learning is the ability to teach and to model that to others. And so when we assign mentors, and every student, every client is assigned a mentor, when we assign a mentor, we're assigning somebody who's accomplished something in the program, but we're also making that assignment because it's going to benefit them. They're going to learn something through the process. You know, a lot of times we talk about this microcosm. You show up and you can't hide. And you give that first report to the family, second report to the family, to the parents, and so often they say, "You get my child." You see them. You know, they're what you're describing is what we saw. Some of them are a little bit more talented at hiding, but it's hard to hide it when you have this amount of supervision. You know, you're not allowed in our program to go off and talk to your peers without some kind of supervision. We call it earshot, with an earshot. And so eventually at some point you're going to leak. And sometimes you're leaking to your peers. So the peers will challenge you on that in group and say, you know what, you're saying this in group, you're saying this in session, but then what about X, Y, and Z that I heard this week or yesterday? I've said this about people who come into our program with some recovery language from the addiction treatment that they may have had. And I'll say to them, I hear the words of your recovery, but I don't see them. I don't see surrender. So the microcosm, this small universe that we have in wilderness that mimics the larger universe, gives us an opportunity to observe and see your child. One of the practices that we practice in our programs, and we ask parents to practice this, is to not use imperatives. Have to, must, should, ought to, good, bad, right, and wrong. Psychologically speaking, those have very little value. We would rather that you talk about, I don't think this will work, or this is what I have found that works for me. Instead of saying it's good to treat people kindly, we say things like, what I have found is when I treat someone kindly, I experience more joy, less resentment, less anger, less frustration, whatever it is that you're trying to share. I think something that can happen in a group is this kind of group think, or what I call dogpiling, right? Where somebody's absolutely showing up with a symptom, with an issue, and it's very easy for everybody to dogpile on that client or student. And I want to be very mindful and kind of pull people off of that dogpile and say, okay, we've made the point. And yes, it's a lot easier to see in somebody else their flaws, their defenses, their armor than it is to see our own. But that doesn't necessarily help when we dogpile on somebody, when somebody gets the same feedback 4 or 5 times in a row. The staff training, one of the things that we're told by other programs is that we don't talk about, we have a webinar on this, but we don't talk about it enough about what the staff, how qualified the staff are. They're incredibly talented, not only in their oversight medically, like I described earlier, but also in their clinical skills and training. So many of them, when they go on to either work at other programs because it's time to be inside, or it's hard to have a relationship when you're 8 days on and 6 days off, they'll say that when they're working at other treatment centers that it feels more like babysitting, because out there for 5 of the 7 days a week, you're really kind of in real time running the show. You also get to sit in on therapy sessions. Let me explain this to you. This is powerful. And we started this in our program. I had never heard of it happening anywhere else before we started it some 18, 19 years ago. And the idea was, in every session, there can be an exception for a special reason, but essentially in every session, the staff member that's going to be working with you or that has worked with you that week, depending upon if it's the first part of the week or the last part of the week, the staff member is going to be in session with a therapist. And our first thought all those years ago was that might feel intrusive. It might feel like 2 or 3 on 1. But after a while, it just kind of becomes invisible to the students. It also provides us the opportunity to train the staff. This is what I was doing when I was asking them about X, Y, and Z. This is why I was asking them when I said this, right? You're training clinically what was going on. And I want you to do this. We go over, we leave a duplicate form with the adolescents. We leave a duplicate form of the treatment plan that we take with us. With young adults, we give the young adult themselves the triplicate of that. And we talk about assignments, themes, session notes, the previous week's notes, specific assignments, so that everybody's clear. It's okay to have a strategic treatment plan concept idea in there that you just share with the staff. But for the most part, they're hearing what you're hearing. We're describing to them, and we're trying to make that consistent. So the staff training, the weekly in-services, we ask them to watch the webinars. They have to write certain assignments and theory papers. They have to read books. They have to accomplish certain training. The staff training is incredible. Many of our staff are practically as qualified at the intervention as many therapists are in other settings. You know, the therapist is the treatment team leader. That's where the proverbial buck stops, at the therapist. They're the ones that are in charge of leading and making the final decision. And then they'll check in with the staff midweek to get weekly updates, to get midweek updates, to make any kind of treatment plan changes, or if something's not happening, or there's a difficulty, or there's something that's stuck, or staff just believes that there's going to be a greater benefit from making a change in the treatment plan, they'll call the therapist and check in with them. There is something sacred about the circle out there, something sacred about the group. I can't tell you how many people over the years, for more than 20 years now, I've had students disclose something for the first time in their life, something they were afraid that they were going to be judged by. It might be sexual abuse or sexual orientation, other traumas in their life. And I have seen, by and large, the grand majority of the students intuitively, instinctively act supportively. And what I always say to people, I think this has application to most all relationships. When I've had students say to me, the group doesn't feel safe, my response is, how do you make it safe? You make it safe by you being vulnerable. Right? You take off your armor. You let down a defense. And the group almost immediately becomes safe. You take a risk. And the magic of that is when somebody else takes off their armor, puts down their metaphorical weapon that they're using to defend themselves, I don't feel threatened anymore. So the best way to create safety in a group is for every person to be personally accountable for their own vulnerability. And of course, we practice certain rituals around confidentiality and talking outside of group about issues and so forth, and we reinforce those as a staff team. You know, there's this idea in wilderness therapy too. There's just not a lot of opportunity for negative outlets that don't get observed, and so because of that, they show up. You know, for example, I've had clients and students come into the program that knew themselves, coincidentally knew each other back home, and parents are understandably alarmed by that and question that. And my response has come to be, I wish we could do that with everybody. I wish every student could come in with a peer that they knew. That would really give them the test. That would really show up as an authentic response to the intervention. And ideally, I'd like every student to have a group that is functioning really well at least one time during their stay. And I would love to have a group that is struggling to function well at least one time during their stay, to see how they respond to both. So when you can supervise relationships, even those relationships which at home might not have been positive, it's an opportunity to treat it in real time. It's like, you know, when you take your car into the mechanic and you're trying to describe a problem, or you go to the doctor and you're trying to describe a symptom that you have, but you can't recreate it in front of the expert. Well, that's what happens in these situations. They get recreated. And it's an opportunity for us to treat it in real time. What can you do when you are trying to create emotional safety? Be as intentional as you can. and at the same time own your emotions. Like, they're mine. Parents sometimes hear me say when I talk about you don't hand over your anger and your frustration and your anxiety to your child. You don't hand it over to them, but it doesn't mean that you don't have it. It means that you own it. It's about you. It's your responsibility. And I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. It's not your child's responsibility. Your serenity, this is what they say in Al-Anon. Your serenity, your peace of mind is not your child's responsibility. And so let your worry and concern, fear, frustration, let it inform you, but you don't hand it to the child. You don't give it to them and say, essentially, be better, be less symptomatic, get off drugs, stop cutting yourself, all right? Manage your sexual promiscuity, whatever it is, so that I'm not worried, I'm not upset. That's not how it goes. You own your emotions. You're very intentional about what you do and don't say. And more often, as I do this, more and more often, I encourage parents to talk with feelings less to their children, because their intention often is, when we ask a couple of questions, is to get the child to respond to that, to use their emotional expressions to manipulate their child. And in those cases, I ask the parents to do that somewhere else, with their own therapist, with their own sponsor, with me. Be assertive and clear and authentic. You don't be careful, walk on eggshells. And you have that luxury when your child is with us to practice that. I was working with a mother not too long ago, and she was kind of walking on eggshells and treating her child like what I call a hot house flower. And I said, it's not going to get easier when your child leaves the program. It's not going to get easier when you have more contact with them or when they get home. So take the risks to be honest, to show up. And it's okay if you make a mistake. That's another thing that happens for parents, is there's so much training around family therapy and communication that parents are afraid they're going to make a mistake. Make mistakes. Show up. Let us teach you. Right? Let us respond. Let's have a discussion about maybe how to say that differently or what's going on. That's the only way we can become effective, is when you show up. Come to understand what caretaking codependency is. Understanding what your passive communication looks like. Be as honest as you can, but that doesn't mean you share everything again. See, people confuse this. I can be honest, but also have boundaries. I hope you'll forgive this example. I hope it's not offensive, but the example that I give is, I have a sexual relationship with my wife. I'm intimate with my wife sexually. I don't share that with my children. That doesn't mean I'm lying to them. It's just not their business. And I think parents get trapped by this idea that if they don't tell their child everything, they're being dishonest or deceitful, and they're not. You get to have a parent filter. You get to have what they call in family therapy an executive subsystem, which consists of all the parents in the system and any professional temporarily that the parent is relying on for advice, feedback, and coaching. That's the executive system. And you get to have that. You get to have your own therapist. You get to have your own place to process and practice self-care. Learn how to use self-disclosure. I think a lot of people are afraid of self-disclosure because they use it and then they're afraid that it's going to be used against them. And I've always thought to myself, nobody can use it against you if you use it for the right reason. If you use it to try to manipulate somebody, then yeah, they can absolutely use it against you. But if you use it to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to model those things, then if somebody beats you over the head with it, tries to, and says this is, it doesn't matter. Because I wasn't doing it to get something in return. I was doing it as a gift. And when you do something as a gift, it can't be technically used against you. Like I described earlier, and I learned this many years ago, pragmatism over moralization. Don't teach, preach. Just show up authentically and talk about what's working and what's not working. You know, in the book, Motivational Interviewing, which really challenges our ideas, the traditional ideas of confrontation, they talk about how confrontation is spoken in calm terms. It's pointing out discrepancies. It's not a power struggle. It's not loud. It's not argumentative. And all of those things have low correlations to effective treatment. So changing it to a more practical discussion. And let them feel, and it's okay for them to feel pain. They need to feel pain. You know, I learned, I talk about this in my book, that when I was trained to be a therapist, or had the idea of becoming a therapist, I thought I was going to school, becoming a therapist to help people feel happy. And then I realized I was going to school to help people feel everything. And in most cases, to learn how to feel pain that they were covering up with their symptoms. And for parents, that's the hardest thing in the world. I just got back from vacation. We were on a tour bus with a bunch of people. And my young adult daughter had to go to the bathroom real bad. This is a funny story. And it was, you know, we were out in the middle of nowhere, and she was debating if she wanted to have the bus stop or pull over, all these. And I got to tell you, I know this is trivial compared to something, but I just was aware how hard it was for me to watch her suffer. Harder than if it had been me, to watch her in discomfort and pain. We talked about that afterwards, and I said it's the most painful, difficult thing for a parent many times to watch their child suffer. We have this intolerance of our, what I call, empathic misery. There's no sound worse than the sound of one's own child crying. So learning to make meaning out of suffering, to see the value in it, to see the value in mistakes and struggles, the opportunities there. That's how we contribute to an emotionally safe context. Use the I feel statement. It's one of the not only recommended webinars, but one that I think it's on right here. It's the one that we ask all parents to look at and to read about and to learn about. It's in my book. Learn it, maybe watch it a couple of times. And I'll tell you, the first time I was taught about the I feel statement, I was 8 years old, because they sent me to the principal's office for the 10th time or whatever it was, and I had to meet with the school counselor. That was me. So I learned about the I feel statement, and I've learned about the I feel statement over and over and over again. And now, 40 plus years later, from being sent to the principal's office, I see the absolute wisdom, the incredible wisdom and resource that is the I feel statement. So watch that, learn it. It's a powerful, especially the other side of it, the listening, the reflecting. Don't make decisions based on how you feel, how your children feel about you. Carry the weight of your own self-esteem. Okay, this is an irony, I think, but when you become dependent upon how they feel about you, you're not safe. Right? If I get mad at you, if I'm your son, and I get mad at you, and you then become paralyzed by that, or shift, or need to do something different, I immediately know you're not a safe person for me to share my hurt, my sadness, my frustration. If I share a feeling with you and you get overtaken with angst, then you're not safe. So you've got to be responsible for your self-esteem, and that's a life's work. That's what my book talks about. That's the heroic journey, is healing your wounds, looking in your past, your closets, your dark forests, deep seas. You're going on your own journey. That's the heroic journey. And it talk about this idea of one of the most damaging things to a child is the unlived life of a parent. It's really important. It's essential that you take care of yourself, because if you don't, they will try to. And if they do, it will be at the sacrifice of what they need. It's this thing that we do in treatment. It's just an exaggeration of what any parent education is. But this thing that we do, it's about the love that goes toward them, not about what they think or feel about you. We will listen. We will run that through our parent filter. We'll let it inform us, but they won't dictate to us what to do. It can't. It mustn't. And then lean into the difficulty. Lean into the struggle and the challenge of it all. Instead of thinking about failures and struggles and upheaval as a as disaster, think about them as an opportunity. One of the things that I see when parents make their visit is they try to make it a happy visit, a positive visit, and that gets in the way of the work. That gets in the way of what's needed. If you try to make it a happy visit, you're going to avoid difficult or uncomfortable things. If you try to get it right as a parent, your honesty is going to be compromised. Your authenticity is going to be compromised. So practicing the skill of showing up. I was thinking about this. We have a conference coming up at the end of this week, and I was thinking about some of the things that we were going to put the professionals through in a positive way. Some of the activities that we were going to have for them. And I was thinking very clearly the thing I think all the time, which is we ask our children to do something that is very hard and very scary. We ask them to take off their armor in front of complete strangers. And so, if nothing else, when you go to your Al-Anon meeting, when you go to your therapy session, when you show up and write your letter and you get coaching and feedback, if nothing else, you start to learn what it's like to show up and be vulnerable and to be exposed emotionally. It's challenging and difficult, and you can develop an endurance to that, right? It's part of what happens in this program is that you become more capable, both as client, student, and parent. You become more capable of dealing with difficult, challenging emotions. Happy to go over any questions that you might have. My son was at Evoke from April to July 2015. He says that when he has kids, he will send them to the wilderness because every kid can benefit from the experience. I'm grateful we were able to give him and us the opportunity to grow through the Evoke experience. Thank you. I feel very, very similarly. There's an opening idea in my book about this from this Harvard anthropologist where she's talking about, this is a 1960s quote, I believe, where she's talking about how that she gets her peas canned now instead of fresh peas, and how she used to peel the peas with her children. And she says, I had to find some of the mechanism to pass on whatever that was, that thing was that was going on, because something was going on more than just getting fresh peas or getting peas. And I feel the same way about wilderness. What are the principles that we can draw out of wilderness? Maybe it's the intentionality. Maybe it's the learning to struggle. Maybe it's teaching by experience instead of by lecturing. Maybe it's the logical and natural consequences. Maybe it's the being on the journey and being on the journey with them. Right? I try to pull those out because the natural world, the wilderness experience, it's so powerful, so replete with so many valuable lessons and tools. I've never seen a delivery method more powerful in treatment than wilderness therapy in my life. Before I was in it, when I first got introduced to it, and since then. All right, no other questions. We go over upcoming announcements, and then if there are any questions at the end, I can respond to those. We want all parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. Al-Anon, you can go to alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or naranon.org to find a meeting in your area for teenagers. They can go to alateen.org. You can also go to NAMI, NAMI.org for other classes or lessons or resources in your area that are free or very affordable. Please follow us on social media. This helps us to contact you, to give you announcements and inspirational stories and blog articles and so forth. You can also listen to all of these broadcasts via the podcast app. All of these will be posted a day or two after their broadcast on the podcast. Go to, on your iOS device, go to Evoke Therapy Programs and subscribe there. Or if you have an Android device, go to the SoundCloud app. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy, Facebook, Evoke Therapy Programs. You can go to the Second Nature Alumni Foundation page on Facebook. That's a charity organization of alumni families that's designed to get money to help people who can't afford therapy. It's already helped to put several families through the program. And then you can go to our Evoke Therapy blog to look at our upcoming stores. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. You can also get an audio version. Go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon and through the Amazon Smiles program. Your purchase of any of the books recommended by a therapist, a portion of that goes to help people who can't afford therapy. I'll be in Orange County next week. No more webinars this week. I'll be in New York on May 3rd. That's strange, isn't it? New York on May 3rd, Seattle May 17th, Chicago May 23rd, and then back in New York on the 7th. I don't know how what's happened here, Andrea, but our slides are malfunctioning a little bit, so I'll just do this. Parent support groups upcoming are listed there, same as ones I just announced. Upcoming workshops, we want all current parents, if they can possibly do it, to come out to the parent workshop. You can also make a field visit if it fits with your schedule. May 27th and 28th at our Entrada program will be the next one. The next Finding You intensive that I run is full, and then the Finding You that's going to be out at the Oasis, so if you want a little bit more of a wilderness experience, is May 28th through 31st. Those are deep, small group, really intense therapy for families and individuals. Pursuits is our therapy light, sober fun, high adventure program for families and individuals. Any more questions before I wrap up? No other questions? All right, folks. The next webinar will be this Monday, April 24th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And I look forward to talking to you then. We don't have a topic yet, but we'll send that out in the next couple of days. It's good to be back. Good to see you. Thanks for attending tonight. I hope these points of contact are helpful. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Monday. Take care. Bye-bye.